Today I'm going to be talking about my favorite horror films on 4K from the mighty 1980s. So let's rock. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Fuzz. So today I'm doing a follow-up to my video from the other day where I discussed 70s horror films and did a ranking. Today I want to talk about 80s horror films. It seems appropriate because to me, the 70s and the 80s have always gone hand in hand when we're talking about the horror genre. I just love 80s horror. Almost as much as I love 70s horror. I've noticed that a lot of my favorite horror films seem to be concentrated between the late 70s and the early 80s. Like, that's when all the classics came out, it seems like. So it didn't seem right to just do a 70s video without addressing the 80s in the horror genre as well. The 80s was where all the major horror franchises, whether we're talking about Friday the 13th or Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street, they all became firmly established during that time and took on a larger-than-life existence. The 80s delivered some of our most revered classics, and it was just an incredibly vital, innovative, and prolific period for the horror genre. So many great films came out during this time, along with a whole slew of not-so-great films that we still love watching anyway. The 80s was a decade where it seemed like filmmakers really amped everything up to the next level and built a direct and rather rambunctious bridge to the modern horror film genre. Practical effects were on fire during this time, absolutely on fire. You had brilliant people like Rob Bottin, Rick Baker, Tom Savini, of course, Greg Nicotero, Robert Kurtzman. These people were among some of the giants in the industry in the world of practical makeup and effects. And I'd suggest that their influence, in one way or another, can be felt in virtually every contemporary horror offering that we get today. So when I sat down to do this list, I actually had kind of a hard time with it. I had a difficult time narrowing it down to just 10 titles from the 80s. Simply because there are so many great films that came out during this time. And I was using the same criteria as I've done with my other list, either on 4K or Blu-ray disc. But I found that even then I had a hard time making a decision and coming up with 10 titles that I was satisfied choosing over other titles, right? I don't usually have a problem picking out these films. It's the ranking them that is the tricky part, right? Because a lot of these films, to me, I weight them fairly equally in terms of how much I like them. So usually with most of these rankings, most of my top 10 are usually fairly close to each other. There's not a huge difference between, say, number 8 and number 4, you know? I love all of these films fairly equally. So in order to choose the top 10, I actually had to create another parameter to kind of limit myself, some other limiting principle. So I narrowed it down to just 4K only. So all of these films are 4K, and you can think of them as my 4K recommendations as well. If you're new to 4K out there and you're looking for some good horror films and you're not sure like which restorations, which transfers might be better than others, well, I've got some great recommendations here for you. As with my previous videos, I'll be doing honorable mentions at the end of my list, not at the beginning. That's just how I like to roll these days. So stay tuned for my honorable mentions when I'm done with this list. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into the list here and see what we got. So starting off at number 10, I chose Joe Dante's The Howling from 1981. Great film. I love this film, and I'll save you the suspense. This is the only werewolf film on my list, or at least on the top 10, right? I know some of you are wondering, what, no American Werewolf for your top 10? I get it. It's a great film. I have a personal connection to this one. I am a big Dee Wallace fan, and I just like this film a little bit more than American Werewolf in London. So it might be a little bit controversial, but this is a fantastic film. Great special effects by Rob Bottin. I think Rick Baker even started working on this one, but then the work got handed off to Rob Bottin when Rick Baker went to work on American Werewolf in London. But I love the tone and mood of this film. And the 4K transfer looks fantastic. It looks exactly as you would expect the film to look. And I would suggest probably the best this film has ever looked, certainly on home media. So yeah, if you haven't checked out this 4K of The Howling, I'd recommend it. It's a great disc, a great picture, and just great story, great film all the way around. So Yeah, The Howling, number 10. For my number 9 choice, I chose 1980's Alligator, starring Robert Forster. Another great film. This is, cashing in on the aftermath of the success of Jaws, of course. But hey, I loved it. Good special effects, and the restoration on this just looks fantastic. So if you haven't ever seen this one and you're a big fan of creature films, this is a fun ride. Check it out. For my number 8 choice, I chose 1986's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre on 4K from Vinegar Syndrome. Now, this is another fantastic release. Vinegar Syndrome did a great job on the restoration of this. It's par for the course for Vinegar Syndrome. If you're familiar with their work, then you know how good their restorations are. So I love this one. I actually like this one more than the original film, right? I just think there's, I don't know, this personally, I connect with this one a little bit more than I do the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. One of the great things about this release, aside from the awesome 4K restoration and of course, the packaging, the rigid side-loading hard box, I always love that about Vinegar Syndrome. They really deliver on the packaging. But what they also did with this release is they delivered an incredible amount of special features, more so than they usually do even. There are 2 discs with special features on them. One of them has a lot of archival special features, like the old feature-length documentary, the making of documentary called It Runs in the Family, I think. And but there's also a lot of new interviews with Tom Savini and others associated with the film. And it's just totally stacked with bonus features. And it's a flood. Really, you could spend hours and hours just watching the special features on this. So, but just a great release overall from Vinegar Syndrome. So yeah, TCM2 for number 8. For number 7, I chose Dario Argento's Tenebrae from 1982. Now this is from Synapse. They put out one of these cool chunky box sets where you get the book and the release and poster and art cards and all that. I loved the artwork on this, and check out the back. Is that cool or what? I hope that doesn't get me in any trouble here from YouTube, but yeah, this is another just stellar release. The restoration, Synapse did a great job on this. Well, actually, I think Synapse did this in conjunction with Arrow, so I'm not sure who did the actual restoration. I know they collaborated with Arrow on this. So they had Arrow released the European versions, and Synapse handled the US distribution. So one particularly notable special feature on this is they have something called Yellow Fever, The Rise and Fall of Giallo. It is a feature-length retrospective documentary on the history of the Giallo film genre. So I'd highly recommend it. That alone was almost worth the price of admission for this one. I mean, it's a great film all around, but whenever they put a nice long documentary in there like that, that's always going to win me over. But if you haven't seen this one yet, assuming you're into Italian horror, I know not everybody gets into Italian horror. Sometimes the dubbed dialogue takes some getting used to, but this is one of my favorite Dario Argento films overall. And so I'd highly recommend this release if you haven't checked it out yet. And at number 6, I chose Stuart Gordon's From Beyond with the lovely and always amazing Barbara Crampton. This one is a newer discovery for me. It was a blind buy from Vinegar Syndrome. I had never actually seen this. I have seen Stuart Gordon's Reanimator and Castle Freak, but I hadn't checked this one out yet. And boy, this really won me over almost right away. This restoration is killer. It just looks incredible. It's very moist and glorpy, I think would be the words I might use to describe this one. But it's a fantastic film, and it quickly rose to the top as one of my favorite horror films. So yeah, if you haven't checked this out, you can't get the slipcover anymore. The slipcover's sold out. I think you can only get the standard Amaray case versions of this. But either way, it's definitely one to check out. And this one also has a feature-length making of documentary. Anytime any of these releases have a long documentary on them about the making of the film or a retrospective, I'm always going to be all in on that. I just love, love, love it when they include feature-length documentaries in these releases. Sometimes these documentaries are actually a selling point in and of themselves. There have been a number of titles where maybe I was a little bit on the fence with them, but then I saw there was a long documentary included as a special feature, and that actually sealed the deal for me and caused me to pull the trigger on them. It was certainly a factor with this one in blind buying it, but boy, I didn't regret anything about this purchase. This is just a fantastic release, so check it out if you haven't seen it yet. For my number 5, I chose, what year? 1980. 1980's The Fog, John Carpenter. I love John Carpenter, as I've mentioned previously. And Scream Factory is just rocking everybody's world with these steelbooks that they've been putting out of the Carpenter films. I actually like the Scream Factory versions of his films better than the Studio Canal releases from the UK. You actually get triple layer discs for all the films, and so you get better encodes. But I just had to get this steelbook because the artwork was just amazing, right? 4K transfer looks fantastic as well. This is a great transfer that is very faithful to the film's source, and it probably looks the best I've ever seen this film look. And I just love this film in general, right? It's just dripping with great atmosphere. That's one of the key things about this that really landed it on the list is the atmosphere for this film. It might be a little slow for some people who, if you've not seen The Fog, but it's actually one of my favorite John Carpenter films. You got a great cast with Hal Holbrook, Tom Atkins slinging a little dick around like he does so well, Jamie Lee Curtis. So yeah, just awesome film. If you haven't seen the Scream Factory 4K restoration, check it out. It's definitely worth it. By the way, if you're enjoying the content, please consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell so you can be alerted anytime I post stuff that you're into. And also don't forget to like the video as well. It really helps out with the algorithm. I appreciate your support so much, so thank you. For my number 4, we have another one from 1980, and that is, of course, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. A great film. I wish I'd been able to get a slipcover for this, but I was a little late to the game on this. We know the slipcovers are usually only produced in like the first production run, and then after that you can't get them anymore. So I was hoping to be able to get a slip for this one, but it didn't work out so well. So what are you going to do, right? But wow, this is a reference quality restoration. It is one of those films that I do recommend to people who are new to 4K if they're looking for something to really demo their system, demo their whole TV and really see what it can do. This is fantastic. For a film from 1980, it just looks amazing. So, and it's just a classic all the way around, right? It's a great film. I mean, what can you say about Stanley Kubrick? He was the man. For my number 3, I chose Dario Argento's Phenomena. And what year did this come out? 1985. Yeah. Now, this is actually, if I picked out of all the Dario Argento films out there, this is my favorite. This is the one I currently like the most out of all of his films. This is just a fun ride. Dario Argento kind of took the giallo formula and then kind of tweaked it a little bit, right? He added a supernatural element, added a chimpanzee, and of course, it's got Donald Pleasance. I mean, what more can you ask for? Young Jennifer Connelly here. I think she was like 13 or 14 years old or something when she made this. So that's kind of fascinating to see as well. But this is a fantastic film. It's got some great twists. The kills are awesome. It's super stylized, like most Argento films. The film's a little offbeat, a little off the wall, but such a fun ride. So yeah, if you haven't checked this out, Phenomena on 4K, and I got the Synapse version. I believe there's Arrow released a version and Synapse released a version. There are several versions. I think there are a couple different artwork designs by each company. So I think this is one of those deals where Synapse was handling US distribution and Arrow was handling the UK distribution. There is a more streamlined version you can get that just has a slipcover. It's all the same content on the discs, but the packaging is a little bit more minimal. It's just a slipcover. You don't get a book or this chunky box set or anything like that. So, and I would also suggest that next to Suspiria, this is one of the best Argento restorations that I've seen. This is almost as good as Suspiria, is also put out by Synapse. It's got so much depth and pop to it, and just a great detail. Everything just really shines on this film. So for my number 2 choice, I chose 1982's Halloween 3. Yes, I really do love this film that much. Next to John Carpenter's original Halloween, this is probably my favorite film in the entire Halloween franchise. It's a fantastic standalone film. It wasn't received very well when it first came out, and it took a while for people to kind of come around to this one and warm up to it, but it's awesome. It's one of those films that has a high rewatchability factor, I think. Great story, really creepy stuff, and of course, Tom Atkins slinging more dick, right? You can't go wrong with Tom Atkins, right? So, yeah, this is... and I love that Scream Factory released it in these hard boxes. I'm just a sucker for hard boxes and packaging like that. I love that kind of stuff. So, yeah, Halloween 3, Season of the Witch at number 2. And for my number 1, the mighty John Carpenter making another appearance with The Thing. Yeah, I love this film. And the great thing about a film like this is you can put it both on sci-fi and horror lists. Although I would make the case it leans definitely more toward the horror side than the sci-fi side. But yeah, the practical effects in this film are just incredible. They were groundbreaking. Rob Bottin really rocked everybody's world with this film. And another film that has a high rewatchability factor. It's also on 4K. It's one of those films that I frequently recommend as a reference demo-worthy disc. So if, for anybody who's new to 4K and kind of looking for some suggestions of what to pick up, I think this is a must-own. This will blow your mind how good it looks on 4K. It's just, and it doesn't even have Dolby Vision. I mean, it's just HDR, but damn, it looks good. So, yeah, The Thing on 4K at my number 1. What else can you say about it? It's an absolute classic and one of the greatest horror films ever made. Okay, getting into my honorable mentions next. I wasn't going to leave you guys hanging. I was going to put American Werewolf in there. It just didn't quite make my top 10. I do love this film. It's a great film. Also, fantastic special effects. And just another stellar 4K restoration as well. Arrow always does great work. So, yeah, if you haven't checked this particular restoration out yet, I'd definitely recommend it. It looks fantastic. And while we're on the subject of chunky Arrow boxes, here's another one. Videodrome on 4K. This just came out last year. This is a great release as well. James Woods delivers a killer performance in this movie. And, I'm not even necessarily a huge body horror guy, but it really worked for me in this movie. David Cronenberg, one of David Cronenberg's best films, with the exception of maybe Scanners or The Fly. But yeah, I saw this film last year for the first time. It was a blind buy, and I didn't have any regrets at all. And of course, Arrow did another great job on the restoration, as is usually the case with their work. They do just amazing work over there. So yeah, Videodrome on 4K. I'm also a big fan of Dead and Buried. I love this one just due to the lenticular slipcover. Isn't that cool? Now, apparently with this one, they actually released several different forms of artwork, several different types of lenticular slipcovers with different art on each one. So you get to choose which one you like the most, and this one was the one I liked the most, so this is what I went with. And by the way, this is from Blue Underground. They are another boutique that does fantastic work. Great restoration, although I believe it's taken from an inner positive. So if there are any grain haters out there, you might not be totally into this one, but I think it looks great. It looks like it's probably faithful to the source. So yeah, Dead and Buried on 4K, nice spooky film, just great fun all the way around. Check it out if you haven't. Also among my honorable mentions is Dress to Kill from Brian De Palma. This is a classic, and I think of it as horror, but some people might think of it as more of a thriller or something along those lines. But it's definitely horror to me. You get an amazing cast with Michael Caine and Nancy Allen and Angie Dickinson. This is just a great film all the way around with a good twist that is probably not too politically correct these days. But it's a great film. And the 4K restoration looks great, as you might expect from Kino Lorber. So, yeah, check it out if you haven't already. And I also wanted to mention The Changeling. This is when did this come out? 1980? Yeah. George C. Scott, nice kind of ghost story, haunting kind of deal there. There's more to it than that, of course, but yeah, a great restoration for what it is. I think this is another one where they didn't necessarily have the original camera negative to work with on this. It was like an inner positive or an inner negative or something like that. The skin tones are a little pinkish on this, I think, but other than that, I think it looked really good. And this 4K came out from Severn Films last year. It's a good film. It's not a particularly gory film. It's pretty subdued and kind of a slow burn, but it's rich with atmosphere, and that's what I love about it. It's just got a great atmosphere. So check it out if you haven't before, The Changeling. And for my last couple honorable mentions, I've got to mention, well, let's do this. A couple more John Carpenter films. Christine. Great transfer. If you haven't picked it up, it's definitely worth owning on 4K, and I would suggest it's probably a pretty significant upgrade from the previous release. Great transfer on 4K. The car, Christine, looks amazing, and let's face it, this is a classic, right? Even if only for one scene, the show me scene, where the car is reconstructing itself. You guys know what I'm talking about, so yeah. Christine on 4K is awesome. And one other John Carpenter, Prince of Darkness. I actually own it on this 4-pack from Studio Canal. I never got around to picking up a standalone Scream Factory release. I am hoping that Scream Factory is planning on releasing Prince of Darkness on the Steelbook next, since we got The Fog and They Lived from them last year. I'm hoping we get a nice green green. I like the color green. So I'm hoping we get a nice green steelbook with some great artwork on it. So yeah, Prince of Darkness. I was just watching this last night, as a matter of fact, and such a great film. Again, it's another one of those classic John Carpenter films with fantastic atmosphere. So yeah, Prince of Darkness would be my last honorable mention here. So that about wraps it up for my favorite 1980s horror films on 4K. I hope you enjoyed this list and maybe got a few recommendations from the deal that you can pursue. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Have a great day, and we'll talk soon.